We are so pleased today that our speaker is John Sirois. John is a citizen of the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation and of the respective Okanagan, Methow and Wenatchee Tribes. John was born and raised on the Colville Indian Reservation in Omak. He carries cultural teachings and histories from his grandmother and extended family that tie him to the lands and waters of the Okanagan and Wenatchee Valley regions. He earned degrees from Dartmouth College in History and Native American Studies and his Master's of Public Administration from the University of Washington. John has worked for 20 years in the Colville Tribes government as the former council chair and representative. He has led departments that have focused on tribal lands, cultural preservation and revitalization, economic development, renewable energy development, policy, and governance. And John currently serves as a traditional territory advisor for the tribes, where he advocates for indigenous rights and to ensure those rights are fully respected. John harvests Chinook salmon at the Icicle every year, and he can be seen there every spring. You can find him camping, hunting, hiking, reading, and salmon fishing with his family. John seeks to build a better future for all generations to come. Please join me in welcoming John Sirois.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. As I sit here, as I sat there, just listening to the service as it progressed, I had all kinds of things going through my mind. So I'll have to make a note of it. I'll have to incorporate a couple things in my speech about how why do dogs sniff each other, and that's one of our traditional stories that includes humor, but also for the kids. But for myself, I just do a little bit more introduction. My parents are Pete and Kathy Sirois. My dad's mom and dad, Eli and Betty Sirois. They're from the North Shore of Boston. My mom's side, Kathy, her parents are Smith and Margaret Condon. My grandmother was Margaret Dick Condon, and she's the one that was born here in Monitor around 1903 at a fish camp. She's the one that always brought us back through here. She was a master basket weaver that used cedar roots to make these beautiful baskets that we used as kids, picking huckleberries and digging roots. And growing up, I didn't understand how blessed I was to receive those teachings from my grandmother, to use her baskets. I thought everybody had baskets to use, when they go pick huckleberries. And later on in life, I come to find out that they're not common, and that was something that my grandmother made common. That's what we did. In the spring and the fall, we would go to the Icicle to get those cedar roots for her to make those baskets. So it really tied us to the land, tied us to this place that when I stand there at the Icicle and fish, and I reach down and grab a piece of that dirt, I know that it is a part of me that goes back generations and generations. I know that's who I am, and I try to pass that down to my daughters and have them understand that connection and feel that love that happens. And I encourage people, if they have questions along the way, feel free to ask. So I'm going to try to cover a lot of stuff and fit it in and try to make sense. But for our people on the Colville Reservation, there's 12 different tribes that were moved there over time. In Pasquasa, the Wenatchee people were moved, but a lot of them wanted to stay. they had worked on an agreement in Article 10 of the Treaty of 1855 with the Yakima to have a fishery there. Chief John Harmelt, who's my ancestor on my grandmother's side, kept at it until his dying day, when they died in a house fire in the 30s in July. I'm not sure why somebody would start a fire to heat their home in July, but you know, they persisted. They had that sense that they knew that that was their land, and they need to keep working on it. And that drive and that desire and those stories continue on in all their descendants through that Dick family, but also the other families that lived in this area. So I'm very fortunate to have learned so much from them. Each of those people that have walked down this road before me. There's a saying within our teachings that we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. They worked so hard to continue, and in that prayer of when they wake up in the morning, they're asking for those coming generations that they can be healthy and happy. They can enjoy a salmon. They can enjoy some roots, just as they did at this time. You know, looking at, you know, I'm going to try to do my best to make sure I do my best to portray that feeling. For us, we feel like we belong to the land. We don't own it, and we're entrusted with the responsibility to take care of it the best we can. And when Howell Chutin, when the Creator made this land, he brought together all the plants and animals and said, you know, there's going to be this beautiful two-legged that, you know, is going to come to this land. I'm making them right now, but they're pretty weak. They can't feed themselves. What are we going to do? And the four chiefs stood up. The first one was Intitiak, the chief salmon, the Chinook. They can eat my body, and it'll feed them. And I'll teach them how to make it, how to catch my people. I just ask that they sing songs, that they have a feast to recognize that relationship we're going to have. And one by one, each of the other three chiefs, chief of the roots, the bitterroot, chief of the berries, the sarbus berries, and the scumheast, the bear, chief of the four-leggeds, they all stood up and said they can also eat from our bodies, our flesh. And as long as they do the same, sing those songs, take care of that gift that we're giving them, we'll always come back. And every spring, when I go down to the icicle to fish, I feel that reconnection, that return of life, of that original relationship that we have with the land and the water. So, you know, one of the key tenets of teachings that my grandmother and other elders told us. So on the reservation, we have 3 different language groups, but we have probably 5 or 6 different religions. And it was the key tenet that you should never argue about whose way their religious ways are better than somebody else. You have to respect them, because that's their way. That's their way to walk toward and with the Creator, to learn more about themselves and learn about their responsibilities here. And that was something that was really pounded into me. Like, you can't argue over those things. That's their beautiful walk. We have our own, and the older I get, the more I appreciate those words, and appreciate the different walks that are out there that people are trying to. And every time I go to the sweat house, I ask for that people can find their way for their relationship with the Creator, so that they can walk a good road. But it really is, in belonging to the land, it's not always convenient, right? So when the salmon are running, that's when you go fish. and you have to make sacrifices around that. When the roots are ready, you go dig them. And sometimes, in our busy world, people are like, I can't make it. Or I'm like, well, that's your choice, but you understand that it's a choice. You have to be there when the salmon are running. That's not. But during the year, and there's also a timetable when you look up in the stars and you can see them changing. It's a different season. It's a different time to dig roots or pick berries, and those stars will give that guidance to you to show you as well, gentle reminders of now it's time to do this, now it's time to do that. So, if I can expand a little bit around some of those core teachings that those elders talked to me about and wanted to make sure that I knew, sort of unique in this area, and that we call it, I guess, today's scholars call it the plateau area. They're fiercely democratic, and almost to each person has their own walk and their own way, and they make their own decision. Certainly we have leaders, folks that earn positions, whether they're salmon chief that looked over a fishery, or the lead digger, some woman that knew everything about the roots and would guide people, and they had responsibilities in that way. But it was so important that each person could choose and had that decision-making power in themselves. Men and women had leadership roles equally for different things, and certainly not that it's utopic, but it was effective economically to share at that fishery. The salmon chief, one of their positions, one of their jobs were to make sure every family that showed up at the fishery had an equal share. And also this Impataqua, this big river, the Columbia River, we call it the Impataqua, provided everything for us: transportation, food. We traveled up and down the river with canoes, and we intermarried further downriver or upriver for a number of reasons. One, it was forbidden to marry into your own family. You couldn't marry your own relatives. You had to find somebody not related to, and find your love over there. But also, people further downriver, they knew at a certain point they had to stop fishing, because the salmon chief would say, no more fishing. These fish, we're going to feed our relatives up north. And along the way, they would do that. And it was important to share that in a way that continues a sense of harmony, a sense of belonging together. Also, that you don't take more than you need. And, if those kinds of situations set up the premises of conflict and of war. And it was their way to incorporate those techniques of equality that was also very effective economically for each of their what they did. When you look at each of the different tribes, as we look up their names, as you go up the Columbia River, they're named after each of the tribes that went to the reservation: the Chelan, the Entiat, the Methow. The Entiat people, it's named after the area that's a grassy water right there. So those place names really refer to describing the area that you're at. Chelan is describing that deep water of that lake, the people that lived along that lake. So the Pasquosa people refer to where that river comes out of that divide, and that's where those people lived. So it's really interesting in learning and understanding the language in those descriptions. It'll tell you exactly what's present on the land and what they're known for. In the Methow, there was, large fields of speets and some Indian hemp that they made their nets and their ropes and their cordage out of. So when at different times of the year, when you had gatherings to celebrate your harvest, or whatever, people brought their goods to trade, so there were a lot of different areas throughout this whole area. The icicle being one of them, at the mouth of the Wenatchee, Soap Lake, down by Moses Lake. There were different areas that were known where you would gather and celebrate and trade and all that good stuff. So it's really important to, when initiating those trades and setting up those relationships, one of the key tenets was that you should always try to outdo your trading partner. And usually you would have a trading partner for life. So you'd try to give them more than what they gave you. So there's like really just interesting things that are just opposite of what we see today and how we live our life. And for me, it's always been just interesting to understand those different dynamics. But it's also super important to do your best to make sure that you're living up to that responsibility that we have with the four chiefs, right? Always take care of the land and the water so that it always provides for you. So that's kind of like that cultural foundation from which I try to live my life and try to, just share with people, both on and off the reservation. Just, this is our mindset. This is how we approach the world going forward, and it's the reason why we fight so hard for getting fish passage, say at Grand Coulee or Chief Joseph dams, because our hydroelectric power convenient dams are still destroying their homes and their ability to live, and that's part of that choice everybody has, and what we do, how it affects other people or beings around us is really important to carry forward and think about every time you make those choices. I wanted to share a little bit because, I can't assume that people know everything about what's going on with the reservation or how it's formed. In the 1930s, and I'll kind of try to connect it up with the fishery, the United States government decided they really wanted tribes to have a new form of government, one that they could better recognize. Not dealing with a salmon chief, a root chief, or it was just too complex. They needed one government. And in 1934, John Collier, who was the chief or the Department of Interior director, passed that law that tribes have to have an IRA, Indian Reorganization Act type of government. At the Colville Indian Reservation, we're kind of made up of a lot of tribes that didn't sign treaties, that weren't always agreeable to those kinds of negotiating tactics. And it took us several years to develop. And so in 34, they wanted tribes to do this. And they wouldn't honor those treaties or those agreements or those benefits that they were going to pay out until you had an IRA type of government. It took us until 38 to develop one. And there's some controversy around that happened too, because some of those families felt that if they didn't show up to vote, that meant they didn't agree with it, that they didn't want that government. So we eventually had a government in 1938. We talked a little bit earlier about that fishery, that reservation that was established here for the Piscosa people, or it was supposed to be. It was surveyed, I think, 3 different times. And it was never formally enacted by the United States Congress. In that 30s period, Harmelt had sent several letters, and he was close to getting it actually finally adopted. Got it back to D.C., and because the Colville Tribes, on the reservation, kept dragging their feet about developing a formal government, Secretary Collier pulled that request to formally put through the fishery here at the icicle. So it was like something that we always, but I don't think we could do it another way, right? Because we were focused on trying to follow our ways and following that same tradition of who we are. But it's something that we always struggle through. So we just heard a quote not too long ago from young Chief Joseph and the struggle that he went through. And I just came back from a trip to Denver at the Clifford Still Museum, who through the Nispium Art Colony in the 1930s. He was there from 1936 to 38. He did portraits of the descendants of the Chief Joseph descendants, and we were able to go down and see some of the early works that he did. He later became one of the fathers of modern art, and that museum is dedicated to that. But he has this huge section of what he did in those 3 years, and some of the different drawings of those Joseph descendants. It's just breathtaking how he was able to capture those details of those people at the time. At the same time, the Nez Perce, the Chief Joseph Nez Perce, were the last ones to come to the reservation. They weren't allowed to return to their homeland, Walama in Oregon. They weren't allowed to go to Idaho. The folks there had already converted to Christianity. They didn't want Joseph and his people to bring trouble because they were traditional longhouse people. They didn't want to be Christians. They wanted to practice their own ways. And the people down there didn't want them. Nope, you can't come back here. And he had developed a relationship as a young boy with Chief Moses, one of the other chiefs on our reservation, the Moses Columbia, who lived just on the other side of the river here. He said, come live with us. And one by one these old tribes were there, and it was really rough. It was really rough for them. One of the gentlemen that I work with there at the language program, he was talking about some of the stories that he learned as a young man about Joseph and who he was. He was more of a religious, spiritual person. He wasn't a war chief, and a lot of people talk about his, acumen on the military field. Somebody else started that war, and he got the blame for it, and he was trying to protect his people as they fled up and to try to make it to Canada. But even to that last day, that very thankful to have a place at least closer to their homelands, not in Oklahoma. So they lost a lot of people in Oklahoma as well. So just listening to some of these quotes, just so many things started going through my mind. I had to talk a little bit about that. There's a really good book. This is kind of a side note. I was writing down a bunch of notes, but Murder at the Mission by Blaine Harden is a really good book for folks if they want to read a little bit more about local history, dealing with the Cayuse and the Palouse and that Marcus Whitman era. That's a really good book to check out. At this point, I would like to see if there's any questions or things that people really want on their mind, because I could really go on and talk a little bit more about the tribal government, but that can get kind of tedious. So, yes. Okay, so the question was, what is the difference between the Wenatchee tribe and the Pasquosa people? So Pasquosa is the Nhamchin language, and that's our own word for ourselves. Wenatchee is a word that was used in the Treaty of 1855 that was done in the Yakima language, the Sahaptin. That's the formal difference between the two words. We use it interchangeably, and we say Wenatchee and Pasquosa, but some of the interesting characteristics with the Wenatchee and the Moses Columbia, We were a connector to a lot of, when we say in between, we were a connector to a lot of the coastal tribes and to the plains tribes and the tribes to the south. So we intermarried with a lot of Yakmas and Umatillas. So we have a lot of those people present within our own membership too. Yes, sir. Oh yeah, that it was really important. Some of those interactions were definitely political, but it was difficult. And we were on our trip down to Denver because we had our we had some of our historians with us. It was an ordeal, you know. You people traveled by horse and buggy. I mean, it took you a couple weeks, and you're gonna stay. Once you got to the place where they're having the celebration, you're gonna stay there for a couple weeks to because it's gonna take a little while. Um, yeah, it was very interesting how those would take place around the fisheries when they're celebrating the really awesome catch of salmon that come back. Those alliances they would make up and down the river. Um, you know, families of power would marry their daughter or their son off to that family down there. Sometimes for political reasons. Sometimes it's. I talked about that fiercely democratic. You know, you own your own person. When you go to these places, that's it's who you met, and that's if you both agree, that's how it is. And it's really interesting how some of those stories get told about how you're a Umatilla and you're like how did that happen? And they start going through their family history, and it's fascinating. That could take a whole day. Those are really good stories.
Golly, word Methow.
Yes.
But the word Methow, told by a native speaker who came to a group of us there, that the word Methow means sunflower, and you're indicating that it has to do with hemp or some other plants, and I'm wondering what your understanding of the meaning of that word is.
It's right. It is sunflower, but I was referring to some of the characteristics of the Methow in that Okanogan River in that area. There's large quantities of that Indian hemp plant, and the ropes and the cordage that came out of the Methow and the Okanagan were highly prized. So when they went to those trading places, like you'd get a lot for a bundle of that cordage, because it's kind of hard work, but it was also unique to that area, and they were blessed with that. So that was the thing that they brought to the trading site. Yes, sir. The question was whether or not there were buffalo bison in this area traditionally. Um, Depends on how far you go back, right, in the historical record. Um, to my knowledge, there wasn't here, but the Moses, Columbia, the Chelan, and Pascosa, these local tribes would band together, and they would travel out to the plains to go hunt for bison. And there's all kinds of stories around that too, like how when you go out there, but there's also a lot of danger involved with that. Warring tribes, just getting successful hunts was a huge thing too. So certainly in the last 1,000 years, I don't think there were bison here, but I could be wrong. But I don't know of that. Our stories talk about coming together and traveling over to get it, and Coyote going over there and getting a bison, and he used his skin and his bones to make a kind of a canoe and got beat up along the way, but he made it home.
Historical record now about the land bridge
Yes.
from the Ice Age, allowing people coming down from the north and working their way down. Then, of course, we had a dig over in East Wenatchee that kind of awakened that information. What in your culture what stories do you have about coming from the north?
Uh, let me see. I don't really know of any stories of us coming down from the north. Um, I think certainly the archaeological records show that we've been here for quite a long time, 16,000 years. There was a question put this before. It was I'm trying to think of the name of the chiefs. He was from Seminole area, and he was at a meeting it was in the 40s, talking about the land bridge, and he said, I think our people traveled over there on that land bridge, not the other way around. There's certainly some language sharing within the Dene people. There's some language groups, and I think you could make a record of their language group moving back and forth. But I don't. It's a really good question, but also bridges go both ways. So to me, it doesn't really matter.
Had mentioned you may have a follow-up to Steve Clem's wonderful Thankful Dog story.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have time to share that?
I do. If I put on ears, it'd be coyote, and that's not. So our Chapticals, our coyotes, the coyote is really present in a lot of the stories, right? But my grandma would get really mad. Those aren't coyote stories, because coyote is a trickster, and he has a lot of power bestowed upon him by the Howling Chute, by the Creator, to help make the world a safer place for humans. But he's a real trickster, and he's just he can't help himself. Some of the stories get really kind of dirty, but this one isn't, and it's pretty cute. He's always messing with people. He's always, whether somebody's hunting over here, and he's like, "Oh, you got that? You must have learned that from me, because that's how I do it." And even though Coyote never hunted anything, so he always tries to take credit for things. And there was this family of dogs that were. He's like, "Hey, come on over here, come to my teepee. I got some news to tell you, and oh, okay, we'll go over there." Everybody's always skeptical when it comes to Coyote, like, "Oh, what are you up to?" So before you come into my teepee, though, you gotta, everybody takes their tail off and they put it over here on the side, Everybody goes in and they're there, and he runs in, fire, you gotta go, and everybody runs out, and they just grab whatever tail they can get, and they run out, and that's. From then on, that's why dogs smell each other, trying to figure out is that my tail or is that my tail? But that's Coyote. He's always messing with people. So when you see dogs and they're sniffing each other, they're like, "Is that my tail?" Yeah. Oh, we had another question.
Yeah, well, I kind of along those lines, there's so many birds in this area, but I never quite hear, I kind of hear about the eagle being, a symbol.
Yes.
But, there's thousands of Canadian geese and all these birds, but I don't hear about birds so much in the indigenous stories.
It's once you start learning a little bit more about those stories, and there's a ton of different ones, and even different families have different versions of some of the same kind of concept. But there are different birds are mentioned in different capacities. Chickadee, for example, is another bird that's present in this area. He was a partner for Coyote because he was trying to defeat this one monster and he couldn't do it. And somehow Chickadee's little bow was able to get into this tight spot to finally kill this huge monster. So throughout, there's different roles for a lot of different animals. They become present. So the Puckalkaint, the bald eagle, has some special reverence because that one flies the highest. And when we say our prayers and we offer up our smudge, the eagle carries those prayers up to the Creator. That's why it's seen that way. I guess gets the most glory, I guess. But there's tons of roles for each of the different animals and how they and what role they play, right?
I had something I wanted to share. We have a whole row of questions here on this side.
All right.
As a former children's librarian, it's always been problematic finding stories about Thanksgiving that I felt were actually factual as opposed to the fable that we've all grew up with.
Yeah.
I want to share title of two books if anyone's looking for children's books. I found them on some website that promotes this type of thing, and our library here actually is becoming more progressive with different kinds of material, and one is called We Are Grateful by Tracy Sorrell, and I'm going to not be able to pronounce this name right, and I don't know which area of the country this comes from, but it's Omak,
Okay.
and I don't know what region this story is from, and it's another native Thanksgiving story, and I think that as parents and grandparents to promote more information about the true I'm sorry, brain fog. Somebody asked me once, do you have a good Thanksgiving story? And I said, you don't want to hear my opinion on Thanksgiving for your child. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of promote that idea that we can reach out for sources for our children as well as ourselves. And then, Angela.
Just real quickly, it's really important. I guess I didn't really stress it as much, but that relationship we have with the four chiefs, and each time that you take some is a space where you can offer thanks. Every morning you offer up that thanks to the Creator for protecting you, and it's like every day is that giving thanks. Yes.
How would you characterize the modern relationship between the Colvilles and the Yakima tribes? I know that's a delicate question, maybe? I
Yeah,
don't know.
the relationship between Colvilles and Yakimas, well, they're definitely our relatives. I have like first, second cousins down at the Yakima Nation, and we're intermarried, and they're two political entities. I think federally recognized tribes that sometimes compete for resources, and sometimes that competition will create conflict. I know the Yakima want to do a lot of fisheries work in this area. We love when people work on restoring salmon habitat. I guess we have an issue when they try to claim it all for themselves. That is the difficult part for us. But yeah, it's like families. Yeah, it's families. What are you gonna do?
Okay. Oh. You're not?
Lamlin, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Can you write it down?
Only the speaker is going to be mic'd, so you'll mostly hear him speaking, and I will try to refresh a question if I can.
I love it. Uh-huh. reflects the 4 chiefs that I talked about. It really does. That's the Enachamchin, which is the language that the Silan and Pasquosa, Moses Columbia, Squaxchano, that's interior Salish, but it's the Wenatchee, Chelan, Moses Columbia version of the Salish. And then in Selkchin is the Okanagan that's spoken by the Okanagan, the Spelem, Sampuel, Methow, and then the Sahaptin language that we do have is the Chief Joseph and the Nez Perce, or the Palouse. So that's another language. So we've got 3 different languages on the reservation. But the Wenatchee and the Okanagan are very similar, just a little bit different. Are they being kept alive? We do have a language program. It's a huge challenge. We lost a lot of elders this last couple of years. So yeah, it's gonna be rough, but we're gonna have to work extra hard at preserving it and continuing it and trying to use it every day, right? Pass it down. I think there's an interest. I think it's hard because there's a lot of competition for their attention, whether it's, you know, TikTok or whatever. You know, it's really hard. Like, it's hard to. I was just talking with a gentleman we were talking about. He's a farmer and how, you know, the need and the desire to make the soil better. How do you transfer that down to your son or your grandkids and to get them to love the soil as much as he does as a farmer? When there's, you know, so it's, yeah, there is interest. There are young people that are working, but I think overall those are the challenges we face. But I think we face that, you know, everybody does, you know. Yeah. Intiak is Intitiak is the king salmon. Going to the left, the 4-legged Slatchinum, and Slatchinum really refers to like their heads are down looking for food. That's kind of what that means. I think that's Bitterroot. And it's a lot of guttural sounds, so I wouldn't expect anybody to be able to pronounce them, especially, it's tough. I remember in our language classes, they would say, if you're not spitting on someone, you're not doing it right. You're not doing it right. You use all parts of your throat and.
I understand that the language those invented or came from missionaries trying to understand, because the original Indians didn't write or record stuff.
That's right.
It's through the missionaries.
So the missionaries that came, like the Coeur d'Alene, they actually